Hello everyone. Today we will be doing a tier list review of all of my law school classes. Well, just the law school classes for my first 2 years because I'm still in my third year and finishing up my last semester. As you can see, I've discovered this cool thing on iPhone called Memoji, which turns your face into an animated figure. The unfortunate thing is that I tried to record this video 2 days ago. I spent 2 hours recording it, and then the whole thing crashed on me and the video didn't save. So this is actually my second time recording it, which brings me a lot of pain. But I am determined to make this video and to finish it. I'll be reviewing my classes in chronological order, from my 1L fall to my 2L spring. And full disclaimer, all opinions are my own. I'm not going to name the professors. I don't want to say anything bad about them because honestly, all of my professors have been great people. I just wanted to make this video for fun, and I thought you guys might enjoy a little insight into what Yale law classes are like. I will say that I am not the model student, so there are definitely a lot of classes that I probably would have gotten a lot more out of had I put more effort in. But it is what it is. This is my experience. This is my journey, and I hope you enjoy the video. First up is procedure, or as they call it, civil procedure in a lot of other law schools. So the 4 courses that we had to take for 1L fall were mandatory, so everyone takes the same classes, although sometimes with different professors. Procedure is basically where we learn about the civil legal system and how cases are brought to court and how they move through the court system. So it's the very basics of litigation. For example, how do you bring a case? What kinds of cases can you bring in non-criminal matters? What kind of information do you have to put in your pleadings? This course had a ton of information. We had to do a lot of reading, and it was also at 8 a.m. on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, 3 times a week. So it was kind of a brutal start to my law school experience. I honestly thought it was a little kind of like hazing. The professor was very strict and would cold call a lot. You kind of never knew when the cold calls were coming. So overall, it was very terrifying to be in the class. Personally, I hate cold calls. I don't think that they do anything for my learning. I actually think I learn better when participation is voluntary, because if I don't have anything to say, why would you call on me to give an opinion? And also, I feel like if I fear getting cold called, or if I think there's a possibility of getting cold called, I'm less likely or less able to pay attention in class. So I really appreciate professors who either use a voluntary participation system or an opt-in cold calling system. Some people do like getting cold called because it forces them to prepare, so I also understand that side. So back to procedure. Our professor is honestly a very endearing person outside of the context of this class, but in this class he was just very intimidating. Although he had the lectures down to a T, so it almost felt like you were watching a choreographed stage play, and everything was super smooth. He was a very good lecturer, and I feel like we got through a lot of very dense information very quickly in the span of 1 semester. That said, I did not like this class at all. I thought it was a very traumatic experience. I did not have fun. I feel like the readings were not that interesting, and procedure is just not a subject that interests me because I know I'm not going to go into litigation. I know I'm going to be a transactional lawyer, so I didn't really feel engaged with the subject matter. On top of that, I was always so scared of getting cold called that being in the classroom was just not a super fun experience. Also, it was super early, so I was simultaneously half asleep but kept awake by the fear of getting cold called. So I would put this class in the traumatic category. Next up is constitutional law. This is exactly what it sounds like. We learn about the US Constitution. This was probably one of the worst classes I've ever had, ever. And I don't know if it was the professor's fault or my fault or a combination of everything, but this was a brutal experience. So I'm Canadian, and I don't say this as an excuse, but I pretty much have no knowledge of American history, nor how the country was founded, what wars it's been in, it's really anything. But the way that this course was taught, which makes a lot of sense obviously because it's about the Constitution, was through a very historical lens. So we started with the election around 1800s, the thing that Hamilton was based off of, I think. and something happened there. I still couldn't tell you what happened, but there was this contested election, so we started there. And then we basically just went in chronological order to see the development of constitutional law in the US over time. As you can imagine, it was a completely US focused course that required knowledge of US history. I remember sitting next to my Canadian friend in class as our professor was talking about the New Deal, and me frantically Googling the New Deal because I had no idea what was going on. Also, I think constitutional law is just one of the least interesting subjects to me academically. It is just not an interesting topic for me. I feel like a lot of the debates around constitutional law are quite mundane. It's really about, people arguing over the meaning of a single word or a single phrase. And I know that constitutional law has large implications on society, and I appreciate that, but it's really just not for me. So overall, this goes in the traumatic category because I did not enjoy it at all. There was also cold calling in this class, so I was always scared that I was going to get asked a question that I had no idea how to answer. Also, I suddenly remembered, but my God, the readings. You would think that Supreme Court justices are good writers, but that's definitely not the case based on some of the opinions we had to read, which were probably like 50 pages long, but definitely could have been less than 20. A lot of the opinions were super rambly and unclear, and I just wanted them to get straight to the point. I feel like in law, a lot of academics or writers or judges could learn a lot from the STEM style of writing, where they put their conclusion up front and then they explain how they got to that conclusion and everything is super clear. Anyway, moving on. Next up, we have contracts. So here at YLS, all 1L students are put into these groups called small groups, which are a group of 16 to 20, I believe, students led by a professor who would teach you one of your 1L core subjects. So for me, that was contracts. You and your small group will have the exact same schedule and take all 4 classes together, including the one with your small group professor. These people will often become your first friends in law school because they are the people you spend the most time with, and the law school tries to do a good job with mixing up the diversity of each group. I found one of my closest law school friends in this group, and I honestly loved everyone I met in it. We got along really well, and I think a lot of that was thanks to my small group professor, who really put in a big effort in trying to make us all feel welcome and setting up activities where we would get to know each other. Each small group also has 2 3L students who will help out with the class and help out with integrating everybody into law school life. These are called Coker Fellows, and I really enjoyed both of my Coker Fellows, who were very helpful and very nice. Back to contracts. So contracts was taught by my small group professor, and she took quite an unconventional approach, I think, to generally teaching contract law. Contracts is a huge topic, and it really spans a lot of different subject areas. My professor decided to use a draft of a book that she was working on to teach contracts in a simple way. This meant that we had a very low amount of reading in this class. I think we would only do 1 to 2 cases, maybe 3 cases per day maximum, and all of the cases were pretty short and easy to understand. Overall, I really, really enjoyed this class. I feel like through the small class size and the low amount of readings, we were really able to dive deeply into each topic related to contracts. So even though we might not have covered as much material as other classes may have, I felt like I got a lot more out of it because I didn't feel overwhelmed with the amount of reading. And I didn't feel like I had to skip readings because I just wouldn't have time to do them all. I also really loved my professor and I really loved my classmates. So in the end, this was truly an incredible experience and I had a really good time. I also like contracts as an academic subject, given that I'm interested in transactional law. I think it's just a super fascinating area of law, and there are a lot of interesting cases and disputes that happen. My 4th and final class that I took my 1L fall was torts. I think it was called Torts and Regulation. This was kind of an experimental course in the sense that my professor wanted to do something new with it. So we had our class not in the law school building, but in a nearby physics, some kind of STEM building at the university. We would all sit in these round tables in groups of 9. There would be screens all around the classroom. My professor tried to make it very interactive by using polls, so we would pull up our phones and answer questions with polls. And he also had a pretty innovative cold call system, which I actually enjoyed. Because we were in groups of 9, each day only a certain number of groups would be on call. And then within that group, it was up to their members to decide how the cold call system would work. Within my group, we divided ourselves into groups of 3, and then we would basically rotate the days that we were on call. This was super nice because it meant that I was really only on call for a few days of the semester. And even for the days I was on call, I wasn't as worried or as nervous because I knew that there were 2 other people in my group who could cover for me if I didn't know the answer. Also, it never felt like the cold calls were mean or unfair in any way. I feel like they were quite fair, and I always felt pretty prepared for the class. Overall, I really enjoyed torts. I think the cases were the most interesting. They were all about how people get injured in various ways, some of which were pretty shocking, but they were all very interesting, and I had a lot of fun learning about torts. I would say that this was a good experience, maybe not incredible, but I think maybe a little above just okay. And I honestly really loved my professor. I think he was really nice and really kind and really cared about his students. So even though this is in between just okay and incredible experience, I will put it as an incredible experience because I really did enjoy the class. Starting our second semester, we could pick our own classes. Other than torts, constitutional law, contracts, and procedure, which we had to take our first semester, the only class that we had to take at some point before graduating was criminal law. We also have 2 other graduation requirements, namely 2 major papers that we have to write, but those don't have to be attached to any specific class. The first class I took my 1L spring was a class called Negotiating International Agreements, the Case of Climate Change. This is one of the best classes I have ever taken in my entire life. It was taught by a leading practitioner in the environmental and climate change field who has negotiated all of the major climate agreements for the US in the past few decades. She was an incredible teacher and extremely supportive. The class was taught in a seminar style, so each week we would have readings and then we would come to class and discuss them, and we also had a mock negotiation near the end of the semester. Each week we would basically go through a different climate agreement and kind of learn the behind the scenes information about how each of them was negotiated and how they were structured. I learned a ton in this class about what it means to be in environmental policy, what it means to negotiate international agreements, and the behind-the-scenes work and negotiation skills that are involved. I also really enjoyed this class because it was a joint class between the law school and the school of the environment. So we had a lot of master's students who were doing environmental degrees instead of just law students, which I feel like added a lot of perspective to our discussions. Overall, I had an amazing time and I learned a ton, and I really admired the professor. This is definitely one of the best classes I have ever taken. Next up is business organizations, or BizOrgs. This is the prerequisite for a lot of business, corporate, and transactional law courses that you can take later on, so I decided to get it over with and out of the way early on. It's a pretty basic black letter course, so what I mean when I say black letter is that these courses are generally taught in a lecture format, and there's a lot of reading because the main purpose of the course is to learn the letter of the law, or what the law is. The opposite of a black letter course would be, say, a seminar-style discussion, where the purpose of the course may be to do research, write a paper, or to discuss various theories, instead of learning what the law is. Overall, I did enjoy BizOrgs. It was your standard law course where you learned what the law is, you read the textbook, you read some cases, and then you do a final exam. Personally, I enjoyed the professor's lecture style. He was always very clear and concise and rarely got distracted by questions. He would also have really good PowerPoints that clearly conveyed the information. And another major plus was that after we went online halfway through the semester due to the pandemic, he did an amazing job with uploading recorded lectures along with the PowerPoints so that we wouldn't have to worry about attending classes live at a certain time since we were all in different time zones. Personally, I loved having recorded lectures because I could watch everything at 1.5 times speed and rewind if I didn't understand certain aspects of the class. Overall, I quite enjoyed this course. I think it was a solid introduction to BizOrgs, and I feel like I did learn a lot of information, and the professor was good. I wouldn't say that it was an incredible experience because it didn't feel that amazing, so I would put it in the just okay category. But overall, it was a good experience. Next up, we have antitrust. And wow, this course was certainly something. Antitrust was exactly what it sounds like. It's about antitrust law. So for us, we took a pretty historical perspective on it, starting with the very, very old antitrust laws in the US way back in the day when they had oil magnates and railroad barons who controlled the entire country. The antitrust laws back then were generally stricter, I think, than they are now, but in modern context, you may have heard the antitrust issue come up with a lot of big tech companies. There has been a push recently to use antitrust laws or to strengthen antitrust laws to prevent a lot of these major tech companies like Facebook, Google, Amazon from essentially taking over the whole world. So I had pretty high hopes for this course. I also heard that it was a super chill course that didn't require a lot of effort, but I came away pretty disappointed overall. I don't think the professor really did any teaching. We would get to class and then he would literally, and I kid you not, literally open up the textbook and then read it verbatim, even though we were supposed to have already done the readings beforehand. Also, halfway through the semester, after the pandemic started and everyone went home, he literally made two roughly 45-minute recordings of his lectures and then sent us a one-page Word document summarizing the rest of the course in bullet form. And that was it. Did I get my money's worth for the tuition? Hell no. But on the plus side, the exam was very chill, very easy, and it was a 4-credit course, so I feel like I got a free 4 credits out of it. So in the end, this course goes in the at least I passed category because it wasn't traumatic, but it certainly wasn't very good either. The next class I took was this course called Corporate Crisis Management. This was an experiential course where essentially at the start of the semester we got a scenario describing a corporate crisis. I think in our case, I don't even remember what our crisis was, but I think we were a pharmaceutical company or some kind of healthcare related company, and then there was some kind of fraud or accounting fraud maybe that had been happening, and we were hired as an outside law firm to help counsel the company and what they should do. So the premise of this course was extremely interesting. It was also co-taught by 3 actual practitioners at a New York big law firm. So I had really high hopes and expectations going in. It was a very small class, I think around 10 to 12 people, and a lot of them were 2Ls or 3Ls with more experience and knowledge than me. Honestly, this class was probably the biggest letdown because I had such high expectations and such high hope for it. Overall, I just wasn't feeling the vibe of the class. I feel like people really didn't participate and the professors weren't very good at encouraging participation. A lot of times I felt very out of my element because I didn't feel like I had the knowledge needed to answer a lot of the complex questions and issues that we were dealing with. However, what was interesting about the class was that each week there would be a new live development in the scenario that we were working on, so we would have to react to it and work in groups to do an assignment each week addressing the issue. I feel like this course has a lot of potential and that we could have learned a lot if the professors maybe had been a little more engaging, a little better at lecturing. But overall, I think it was just bad. Part of me wants to put this course in the at least I passed category, but I think in the end it has to go in the traumatic category because at the end of the semester we had this kind of mock simulation where we had to speak with government lawyers and we had to pretend that we were an outside law firm representing the company in trouble. Our professors actually invited actual government lawyers to come to be the agency in question. I remember I got grilled about something that I had done that I didn't know the meaning of. So I had to put attorney-client privilege, confidential information, or whatever as the heading on the documents that I had submitted to the government agency. And I had only put this on the document because I had seen it on a lot of other documents and I thought that this was just a standard thing that you put on your document. So I submitted it to the agency because they requested it, and then one of the first questions I got during our simulation was, so are you giving up your attorney-client privilege by submitting these documents? And I just froze. I literally had no idea what attorney-client privilege was, what confidential information meant in this context, or what it meant to give up the attorney-client privilege. It had just been a standard header that I had been adding onto all of my documents up until that point. So I really didn't know what to say. Overall, I think it was kind of a traumatic class, and it just felt like a fish out of water the whole time. The 5th and final class I took that semester was a clinic called the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Clinic. So for a little bit of context, each semester at the law school we are expected to take between 12 to 16 credits. Minimum 12, maximum 16. In order to graduate, you roughly have to take around 13.5 credits each semester on average, starting your 1L spring. The amount of credits per class varies depending on how much time is spent in class and how much work it is. Although I will say that credits do not correlate always with the amount of work involved. Case in point, antitrust. My 1L spring, I decided to take 5 courses total, one of which was a clinic. Clinics are not exactly your traditional courses. Rather, they are experiential classes where you help real people with their real life, real world legal issues. All of them are supervised by practicing attorneys because as law students, we are not allowed to give legal advice without the supervision of a licensed attorney. Clinics are a fantastic way to explore different practice areas and to see if a certain practice area is a good fit for you beyond law school. For me, I took the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Clinic, also known as EIC, because I'm interested in transactional law, and this was one of the only offerings related to transactional law at the law school. Law school is very litigation focused, which makes a lot of sense, but because I knew early on going into law school that I didn't want to do litigation, I wanted to focus most of my time on transactional law to see if it was a good fit for me. If it wasn't, then well, I'd be kind of screwed because I really don't know what I would do after I graduate. So thank goodness that I love this clinic, and I've stayed in it ever since. EIC is dedicated to helping startups and founders with their legal and business issues. It is super fun because we get a huge variety of clients. I've had clients in the biosciences, I've had a food company, a mental health startup. Some of them are run by Yale students, some of them are run by people in the New Haven community, and some of them are elsewhere. But most of our clients, I would say, are in the northeast of the US. Like I said, we basically help startups and founders with their myriad of legal issues. I've done license agreement negotiations, I've helped incorporate companies, I've helped draft employment agreements, founders agreements, such as related to their stock vesting. Another interesting part of the clinic is that a lot of times these founders will ask you for business advice as well, which makes it a lot more interesting because you're not just there kind of as an encyclopedia to answer their legal questions, but you're also there as their general advisor, especially at a time when they have so few resources to work with. Overall, the clinic has been one of my favorite experiences at the law school, and I don't think I would have enjoyed my time as much if I hadn't had the clinic. Our professor and supervising attorney is extremely nice and one of the most supportive people I've ever met. So this is definitely one of the best, if not the best courses I've taken at the law school and deserves to go in the top tier. Alright, on to 2L fall. The first class I took that semester was called Applied Corporate Finance. I took this class because I felt like it would be useful for my practice in the future, given that I have no finance background whatsoever. The way this class was set up was that for the first half of the semester, we learned financial concepts about valuation. So how bonds work, how to value a company, different financial modeling, but very basic stuff. A lot of that was spent on Excel. This was honestly a really rough part of the course for me because I'm really bad at math and I also have no finance background. So I really had no idea what was going on in most classes. Our professor also spoke really quickly and would bulldoze through all of her lectures so that we basically had no time to ask her any questions because she had so much material to cover every single course. There was also cold calling, but it was pretty much in alphabetical order, so you kind of knew when your turn was coming. And the one day I was actually cold called, I actually wasn't there in class because I was on a trip to Banff last year. Oops. That was fun. Anyway, the second half of the semester was where we started applying the law. Basically, we would go through a lot of cases where we would be able to apply the financial concepts that we had learned earlier in the semester. We did a lot of cases surrounding creditors' rights, bondholders' rights, and ended with mergers and acquisitions and how judges and courts value a company when there's a merger or a sale of the company. Honestly, as I was going through the course, I hated it, and I wouldn't have made it through the course if it weren't for 2 of my friends who were also taking it. We formed a study group and were able to come up with a really good outline for finals, which honestly saved me. However, as I was studying for finals, everything sort of clicked. And I don't know if it's Stockholm Syndrome because by that point maybe I had been so traumatized by my professor's brutal teaching style, or if it was just simply the course had started working and all the knowledge had come together and culminated in this kind of understanding of corporate finance. But after I finished the course, I honestly genuinely really enjoyed it. And it was one of the best courses I've taken at the law school. I recommend this course to everyone now who wants to do transactional law. So when all is said and done, honestly, this would go in the top 2 tiers. And since I'm feeling extra generous today, I'm going to put it in the top tier because it honestly is one of the greatest classes I've taken at the law school. Next, I took federal income taxation, which is the prerequisite tax course for all advanced tax courses. I had heard a lot of really great things about the professor who was teaching it, so I was really excited to take this course. Overall, I think it was a really, really good course. I feel like I learned a lot, and I feel like even though I don't remember any tax now, I think my overall impression going through the course was that I was learning a lot and that the professor really cared about her students and really did a good job trying to teach virtually during a pandemic. All of her lectures were super clear and she did a really great job with her PowerPoints and really getting us to work through some super dense material. I also really appreciated that she had a voluntary on-call system, so I never felt like I had to actually go to class because I think the class was at 7 a.m., 6 or 7 a.m. my time, which was just a brutal time to be awake, so I would always watch the recorded lectures afterwards. Honestly, I think the professor was one of the best lecturers I've ever had, but overall I didn't enjoy tax as a subject matter, and I don't think I ever will. I'm definitely not cut out to be a tax lawyer. I think the code is just extremely dry and boring, and I feel like tax law changes all the time, and I don't like having to keep up with new developments. Overall, I think this course falls between the just okay and the incredible experience category, but because the professor was such a sweetheart and really cared about her students, I'm gonna bump the course up to incredible experience. The third class I took my 2L fall was called American Legal Profession. This was a lecture course once a week, 3 hours per class. I took it as part of the professional responsibility requirement for graduations. Usually people take the course called professional responsibility, which basically just teaches you about ethics, but I thought that American Legal Profession would be a more interesting route because it was supposed to teach us about the history of the American legal profession and various legal practices. In the end, this course was okay. I think the professor wasn't the greatest at lecturing, and that coupled with a 3-hour format and the fact that we were on Zoom, the lectures just weren't very engaging. The good part about this course was that it was only 10 weeks long, so it ended in November, so I was done with a course early on in the semester. And also I stopped going to the lectures halfway through and would just speed run the whole thing at 2 times speed on my own time. I think overall the material was interesting, and I do feel like the textbook was actually pretty interesting to read because there was a lot of historical facts and knowledge and data on the legal industry, but the way it was taught was just not the most engaging. So overall, I would put this in the at least I passed category. On to 2L Spring. By this time, we were in our second and a half semester of online learning, so we had really kind of settled into the rhythm of it, and I was honestly enjoying my time at home with my parents and my dog. The first course I took that semester was called International Business Transactions. This was a lecture class where the professor would just lecture about various topics related to international business transactions, and we would also have a lot of super interesting guest lecturers and practitioners come in. For example, we learned a lot about project finance, which is how major projects such as stadiums, pipelines, railroads, airports are built. We also covered issues such as corruption and international trade. Overall, I really, really enjoyed this course. I think that the professor is one of the best lecturers I've ever had, and that she truly cares about all of her students. This course was not small. I think it was probably around 70 students, and we all had to write final papers that were roughly 25 to 50 pages, depending on how long you wanted it to be. And I was so impressed that she managed to get through all our papers and give us feedback on them. Honestly, this was one of my favorite courses. The professor rarely cold called, and I feel like when she did, she would either give you a heads up or the question would be pretty basic, so I never felt like I was living in fear the whole time. I feel like it was a really great survey course on international business, and I did learn a lot. All of the guest lecturers were super interesting, and I always looked forward to watching the lectures because it almost felt like a podcast at some point where I could just sit back, relax, and kind of absorb whatever information I wanted to. There was no pressure of having to learn the material for an exam at the end because we were writing papers. So I would honestly put this in the greatest class I've ever taken category because it is one of the greatest classes I've ever taken, and I recommend it to everyone I know. Next up is criminal law. Criminal law is a requirement for graduation, and I decided to take it my 2L spring so that I could get it out of the way. This class was taught by a philosopher, so it was definitely very, very theoretical. And although criminal law is not criminal procedure, so we weren't going to be learning about topics like bail or how the criminal justice system works exactly or how sentencing works, it was, I feel like, even more theoretical than a usual criminal law class would be. Because criminal law is a state-based law, meaning each state has very different criminal laws, we focused a lot on the Model Penal Code, which is kind of this draft law made by a lot of practitioners and various academics that some states have adopted to different variations. I think overall this course was okay. I appreciated that it was taught in a recorded lecture format, so we would basically watch a recording beforehand and then people could show up to class and have a discussion and ask questions. I, of course, being me, never showed up to class, and also because I was in a different time zone, but I would watch all of the recorded lectures at 1.5 or 2 times speed. Sometimes 2 times speed was a little fast, and I feel like I did learn a lot about criminal law and the criminal justice system and how messed up it is. I thought the exam was pretty fair, although, to be honest, I only got through the exam because of my 2 friends who graciously provided me with their outline. Overall, the course was, not super dramatic. It was a decent course, and the professor seemed nice enough. So I would put this course in the just okay category. Next up, I decided to add another clinic to my roster. So at this point, I was still in the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Clinic, and I'm still in it. I'm going to be in it until I graduate. But I thought it might be fun to try something new, so I decided to add the Environmental Protection Clinic to my list as well. This clinic operates very differently. It's project-based, so when you bid for the class, you bid for the specific project. And there was one project in particular that really interested me about the meat industry and meat processing. I bid for that project and I was lucky enough to have gotten it. This was a very group-based clinic, so I was put into a team of 4, myself included. It was 3 law students and 1 student from the School of the Environment. And what I love about this clinic is that all of our clients are wonderful. A lot of them are nonprofit environmental organizations doing really great work in the field. And the interdisciplinary nature of the clinic means that you really do learn a lot more than just the law. For my project, we specifically researched the meat processing industry, which, by the way, is super horrific if you look up anything about how animals are raised, produced, and killed in this country, or anywhere for that matter, but especially in the US, which is really the pioneer of factory farming. Anyway, the final output of this class was a group memo that we then sent to our client, which was an environmental organization. I feel like all of the supervisors were incredible and really tried their best to support us, and our clients were also very nice, and I loved all of my group mates. So this was a truly, truly incredible experience. The only thing that I would say that doesn't put this class into the top tier for me is that I hate writing papers and I hate doing research. And I don't think I fully understood the extent of how much I hate doing research until this semester. Because this semester I somehow got myself into 3 paper classes. So I had to write 3 papers, one of which was this group memo. By the end, I just felt super burnt out and super tired, and I didn't want to do any interviews. I didn't want to do any more research, but I chugged along and we made it over the finish line. So I would put this clinic in the incredible experience. And we are at the end. Save the best for last, of course. Can't believe I finally made it through this video, and we are at the end of my 2L spring. The last course I took this semester was a course called Food Systems and Environmental Law. Straight up wanted to say this is one of the greatest classes I've ever taken. It was taught by an actual practitioner with decades of experience in environmental law. It was a small course, and it was also cross-listed with the School of the Environment, so we also had some forestry students with us. I think we had around 15 people in the class, maybe. It was all on Zoom, but the professor did an amazing job with encouraging class participation, and unlike most of my other classes, I never felt uncomfortable with participating or speaking up. I don't know if it's because I was more invested and interested in the subject matter, or if it was just because everyone was always so nice and supportive and affirming with their comments. For this class, we learned, as the course title sounds, about food systems and environmental law. This class, coupled with the meat processing project I had been working on for the Environmental Protection Clinic, made me pretty much vegetarian, or at least aspire to be vegetarian. When I'm at home, I feel like it's really hard to be a vegetarian because meat is a large part of my culture and my parents eat it and they're super against me being vegetarian. But when I'm at school and when I cook for myself, I've stopped cooking meat just because of all the stuff that I learned in these 2 courses. I feel like there was so much interesting information and the readings were never dry. Each week we would go through a different issue, such as the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act or regulation of factory farms. We also had a lot of interesting guest speakers come and give presentations on their work. The final project for this class was, you guessed it, a paper. So I wrote a paper about factory farming and how a lot of these meat producers are massive companies with a lot of market power and therefore should be held accountable for the environmental pollution that results from their farming practices. However, the problem with holding these producers accountable is that a lot of them aren't actually directly raising the animals themselves. Rather, they will contract out the work to contract farmers, which are often very small family farms. And these farms, even though they are emitting most of the pollution, are fully controlled by their contracts, usually almost exclusively with only one company, so they don't have a lot of choice in how their farm actually operates. The current state of the law makes it such that when you sue a factory farm or any farm for pollution, you can't really reach the major meat companies because they are not the ones actually raising the animals. My paper kind of explored ways to hold these massive meat producers accountable for the pollution caused by their contract farmers, which was a super interesting project. Overall, this class was an incredible experience and I feel like I learned a lot and I actually retained a lot of the information, which is surprising. I think part of it is because I was already interested in the subject matter to begin with, so I definitely put in a lot of work in this course and it really paid off. To the top it goes. Well, that's a wrap. There you have it, the tier list for my first 2 years at law school. Again, full disclaimer, all opinions are my own, so don't come at me, don't sue me. Professors, don't take this personally. I hope you enjoyed the video and that it was somewhat insightful. Until next time.